Thank you for joining us on Balance Sheet Banter, where we talk with talented executives from across the financial services industry on a wide range of topics, both professional and personal. My name is Ryan Henley. I lead the Financial Institution Strategies Group at Stifel, where we help depository management teams better manage their businesses. As always, some of our conversation may veer into a more technical space. Please know that any references to investments and strategy are meant for institutional investors. I am extremely excited to introduce my guest today, a gentleman named John Lorino. He's the Senior Vice President and Treasurer at State Bank and Trust, a bank based in Winfield, Alabama, that has been there and served that community for more than 100 years. Before stepping into the treasurer's chair, John spent a considerable amount of time on capital markets side at a regional broker-dealer, as well as at a banker's bank. John is a University of Alabama graduate, self-described numbers cruncher whose bookshelf runs from The Big Short to Liar's Poker. His favorite film is Goodfellas, and he is a diehard Memphis Grizzlies fan and Alabama Crimson Tide fan. John, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
John, I'd love to start at the beginning. Give us a sense of where you grew up, how you grew up, and who helped shape the way that you view work, you view life, and the balance of all that.
So I grew up in Birmingham, right outside or right in the middle of all of the suburbs of Mountain Brook and Vestavia, but it was more of a unincorporated part of town. So I think it was right between Irondale and Mountain Brook. And my school life was at two Catholic schools, so at St. Francis and at John Carroll. And my family is, it's an all Italian family. And, we emphasize this a lot. And I think maybe other members of my family overemphasize the all Italian aspect. But, looking back, and I was reading some of these questions about my background, I think it is an integral piece. I think it is important. So this all Italian community in Birmingham, you don't really expect that in a place like Birmingham. You think of it in New York or New Jersey, but there's a very large Italian community in the city of Birmingham. And it was my great grandparents, so my dad's grandparents, that came over here from Italy. And I know specifically that my great grandfather, he came over here just with his friends when he was 14 years old, left the rest of his family. And they move here. And the funny story that we often comment on is when him and his friends came over here from Italy, they thought they were going to New York. Everyone went to New York, and they ended up in New Orleans. So I'm assuming that was a huge culture shock from what they thought they were getting into. But yeah, so my parents, both of them grew up in the same neighborhood, and it was an all Italian community. And then they moved to another neighborhood in Birmingham, and then lived like 4 doors down from each other when they lived there too. But it's a big piece because the way I guess Italians just are with being a hardworking group of people that I grew up with, work being very emphasized as just a thing that you do. So when it came to like being in high school and playing high school sports, I barely played high school sports, and I just, had not a full-time job, but an after-school job. Like that was much more normal than going to play football or something. And then when I got to Alabama, I probably worked, 20 hours a week, like in addition to school, because I was just so used to working. It was just something that you always did. Same with my brother. He worked at like a plumbing supply company. You don't think of many college kids like leaving their history class and then going to, ride around on a forklift at a plumbing supply company, but that was just like super normal for me and him. It was just,
Right.
you just left class and then went to work. So that was kind of grew up in that kind of, I guess, mindset, if you will.
That's fantastic. You clearly a big family. You've got several kids. You've got lots of cousins. Talk about that.
Yeah. So it's funny when you get married and you start doing all these different traditions with other people, and like your spouse's side of the family, and you just start seeing other people on the holidays, you start realizing how not normal it is to have Thanksgiving with like 65 people. Like that's just not normal, I think, for like most people. But for us, it's like, yeah, of course you're going to see all of your first cousins and your second cousins and your third cousins on Thanksgiving and on Christmas, even though you just saw them, a month before.
Right.
Like it was just very normal.
Yeah. So you talk about your experience at Alabama. You didn't start finance, you didn't expect finance, but you ended there. How did that happen?
And I can't even tell you what I started with initially. It might have been engineering. It might have been something else. I don't particularly know.
Yeah.
And maybe by the time I was a sophomore, I was like, okay, now it's getting down to it. And I have no one in my life that is in finance besides one of my uncles. And at the time, he was on the derivatives side. So I think he does interest rate swaps, and he mentioned, you should think about a career in XYZ. And as much as you don't know it, Ryan, but you were very integral in my career path, because he's like, as you're looking for your major, there's a class by, I think the guy's name is Dr. Brooks. I was like, okay. He's like, so go find whatever major that is, because there's a guy named Henley and a guy named Kamal that work here, and they were in that class, and I think you should take that class. So
That's fantastic. I never knew this story.
Yeah,
I didn't know this.
I navigated my career path by figuring out which major had the class that Dr. Brooks taught.
Yeah.
And he only teaches one undergrad class. And so it was finance, it was investment management, and it was intro to derivatives.
That is phenomenal. I didn't know that story. As long as I've known you, I didn't know that I had any influence at all around where you ended up.
I forget about it. And then, just every now and then it pops into my head. And he was like, yeah, he told me to take, that class specifically. And he referenced, I guess, were you at Compass Bank at some point? That's where.
Well, so Kamal was at Compass Bank. That's right. And I was at Colonial Bank, and we both would do shifts at Alabama, and we'd step into these classes throughout the years. I did it many, many times. That's so funny, man.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So what I find really interesting about your career path is the where you started and where you are now. And I would really love your view on the transition experience. So describe generically, broadly, where you started in the industry, and then walk us through to how you ended up at State Bank and Trust, and what was appealing to you about buy side versus sell side, and how that transition went.
And it starts with kind of a joke. So at some point, I'll reference Steve Weissman. He was my business partner on the bond side for over 10 years. But a joke between me and him is that I was the only person that he was forced to hire. And by that joke was, I interned at the broker dealer that I ended up working for out of college. And someone made a one-off comment of like, oh yeah, great, good having you here this summer. You should come back and work here one day. Like, just like a very off the cuff remark. And I just kind of started relentlessly emailing people about, hey, I want to, I'm interested in doing this. I want to, I just kept pursuing the idea of it. And at some point while I was interning, they were talking about this new route that they wanted to take with new bond salesmen. And it was put them on the strategy desk first before putting them into bond sales. Mm-hmm. And it was, at least give them an idea of what they're talking about before you just give them a phone. And so I think I had harassed enough people that eventually the head strategist at that broker dealer, I think I signed the contract with him. I don't even know if I was supposed to be in bond sales initially, but I started off my career doing, I think it was just about 6 months on the strategy and research desk, and mainly did portfolio analysis. And then Steve, who eventually I became his partner. When I was on the strategy desk, I used to do custom analysis for him constantly. And he's a very unique personality, the way he approaches the bond business. And after 6 months or so, I think he offered me the opportunity to become his junior partner. And I said no. wanted to try it on my own. And I tried it on my own for probably another 6 or 9 months. And then I was like, hey, is that offer still on the table? This is terrible. Um, and I think I came into his life at a very good time because he was also running the rookie training program. And so he had like 15 or 17 rookie salesmen underneath him. So I got to come into something where I was really always digging in and looking for investment opportunities, swaps, just anything like that. I wasn't really cold calling that much.
Mm.
And that kind of persisted through the years that, Steve's unique way of approaching the business, if he's technically the senior partner and I'm the junior partner, he loved cold calling, which
Mm.
is, which which is weird. I should
That's
be cold
unique.
calling. Yes, I should be cold calling, but
Yeah.
I never really had to.
Yeah.
And so at some point, a couple years in, he thought it would be a good idea if I attended Alabama banking school. And he asked the company, he's like, I want to send John to the Alabama banking school. And they were like, I don't see how that benefits us. And so he said, well, I'm going to send him and I'll pay for it. So Steve
Wow.
sends me to the Alabama banking school. And, one of the first days I meet my now counterpart, Collins Davis. He was also there. And we sat right next to each other. And there's a lot of socializing that goes on at the Alabama banking school, because you're in class and you're learning whatever commercial lending, and you learn a little bit about the bond side, but very very minimal. But you're just learning about all aspects of the bank, and it's a 3-year program. So every summer when I would go back, and it's not it's people that are in all levels of their career. So you have people that are in their 20s and you have people in their 40s. You have tellers, you have lenders, you have all types of people there. So at the time when I meet Collins, he's right out of college. I think I'm 2 or 3 years out of college. He's probably a year or two out of college, and he was just a lender. And State Bank, which we'll get to, is a family owned bank, and at that time it was owned by 2 families. And I think it was probably 2016. The CEO of State Bank, he passed away, and he was the one that managed the bond portfolio. And they just kind of gave it to Collins. They're like, you're interested in this stuff. Here you go. And, it's a bond portfolio that's probably like 70% of the bank's assets at that time. And he had known me. He knew I was a bond salesman. And I just kind of, we just clicked from that moment on. So it's like when I say, me and Steve came along all of this way in the bond business, well, me and Collins were very integral in the bond business as well, because he was a year or two out of college and got handed a $150 million bond portfolio, and he needed someone to teach him, and he didn't need some 50 or 60-year-old to teach him. He needed someone that was about his age. So that's how we came along. And so you fast forward the years from there, went over to a banker's bank, and there's equal things that I could say about the banker's bank that's better than a broker dealer, worse than a broker dealer. But from there, you start to learning a little bit more about the intricacies of community banking instead of just the bond side. That which was all I knew. And I think it was because of the friendship with Collins that just kind of kept persisting over the years. Because we became such great friends, I just started learning more about banking. And so we had a running joke for a lot of years that was, one day I'm going to get you to work at the bank. And I was like, I don't think we can ever make that happen. 1, I lived in Memphis. 2, I had no plans on moving to Winfield. And I was like, what am I even going to do there? Like, I can't, all I know is bonds. And I was like, yeah, that's a big part of the balance sheet, but that's not enough. So the joke persisted for a while. And then eventually in 2023, he, and we'll get to that part a little later, but enough stuff was going on at the bank that he was a little worn down of doing everything he had to do. And he's like, I need you to come here. And so I drove to his house one night, and I had like a notebook, and I was like, here is everything that I will need to to consider working here. And a big piece of that was I now live in Birmingham, but your bank is an hour and a half away from me. So some flexibility on the remote work was a big piece of it. And he read the list and was like, all right, that's fine. Do whatever. Do whatever. When do you want to start? So that was my transition into community banking from the bond side. It just kind of happened. And when you think of it, the biggest piece there was Steve wanted me to go to banking school.
Yeah.
You know,
it's phenomenal to hear the story about Steve. I've known Steve for forever. Fantastic guy, but that's a huge step of generosity to make that happen. I mean, that's, I guess, to a degree, selfishly for the partnership and the book that you guys had together. But at the same time, he didn't have to do that.
No,
it doesn't surprise me because Steve's like that. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
He's kind of a giver like that. But that's a phenomenal story. I love hearing that.
Yeah, and he's always been like that. He's been very, very. We were talking about this the other day that yes, he was a senior partner and I was the junior partner, but it just kind of so happened at that time that I stepped in and started working with him. His best accounts had just gone out of the market. So we really had to start and build this book over from the ground up. And yeah, he was more seasoned than I was, but I did not come into a position where there was like a ton of business to be had. There was nothing. We at that point we basically had no accounts because his two best accounts had like CFO changes or something, and they were effectively gone. And then when we moved over to the banker's bank from the broker dealer, the non-compete, they work. And we started over again. I think Collins is really the only piece that held through from the dealer to the banker's bank. Collins stayed, and that was because of our friendship. But most places, they're like, haven't heard from you in 6 months. We thought y'all got out of the business.
Sure. Yeah. No. So talk about community banking. I mean, if there were ever a pure sense of the community, I'll say it again, the bank's been there for 100+ years, serving that community. Family owned bank throughout that entire time period. What's the experience like there at the broker dealer? You worked with certain larger public, more broader geography. Whereas this again is somewhat hyper focused on that community. Talk about that contrast. Talk about what that experience feels like now.
Yeah, and so now the bank is 92% owned by one family. The other family, after the CEO passed away, they got bought out. And so when I say it's a family owned bank, it is really a family owned bank with that high of a percentage, and that, I think that speaks volumes in the community, because you have two people from the family that owns the bank that are your top two people. The president, CEO, and the CFO and chairman of the board are all, they're the family members that own the bank. So you'll have Dana, who's the president and CEO. She'll go to the school. She's on the school board. She'll go to this meeting. She'll go talk to the superintendent over here. She'll go, deal with the mayor over here. And then you have, Collins is the CFO and chairman of the board, but he's also our top loan producer. And people love working with Collins. You'll have, anyone from a truck driver to someone that owns a series of car dealerships, who owns, a concrete plant, all these people, and they really just like dealing with him. And so anytime he tries to pull back on the lending, it just doesn't really happen, because he's integral to the community. And so you'll community banking, in a sense, you're just banking the people. You're not so much looking at, trying to just get in all this outside money from funding. That is a piece of it. Yes, I want to try to bring in outside deposits from outside of the community, or we're making loans in different areas, but it truly is, just a very integral part of the community.
Mm-hmm. What, balance sheet management really rolls generally to you and Collins to whatever degree, but you're a huge part of the strategy there, and you've been there through, given the timing, some pretty challenging moments. I mean, Silicon Valley, you were right around that time period, I think, when you joined, and then thereafter. What are the biggest challenges that you've run into since you've been there, and just talk about how you collectively in the group, the team, got through it together.
So I would say Silicon Valley was probably the thing that brought me to the bank, and then it is what has caused the most problems. So the side effects of Silicon Valley failing, just rippled through the banking industry, and it
Mm.
be primarily because of the concerns around liquidity. And so, to tell this story, you have to have the context that I gave you of Collins being, at that time, he was in charge of asset liability management. He was in charge of the bond portfolio. He's the CFO, so he's overseeing all of that stuff, and he's the top loan producer. And I
Yeah,
think,
that's a lot.
yeah, the straw that broke the camel's back of him saying you got to come here was, you know, the Silicon Valley failing that kind of perked up, especially, and I don't know what happened in other states, but in the state of Alabama, there was that very big focus on always having a lot of cash. Your big depositors having a plan for them. There's became this hyper focus on all of these liquidity aspects, and I think that's when I stepped in. So the challenges have primarily always focused around, funding is going to be everyone's challenge. You hear that across the country, but
Mm-hmm.
the bank from, say, let's go back to 2017. The bank used to be 30% loan to deposit. And today we're a little over 70% loan to deposit. So we've, had this huge growth in loans. And, one of our board members who's an accountant and he does audits and all of this stuff. And he's like, normally when you just any other business that grows a balance sheet, they can just grow. But y'all have the unique problem of you can't just grow because you have to make sure your capital's in line. You got to make sure
Yeah.
you have enough liquidity for that growth. And, us specifically, when you look at a bank that was 30% loan to deposit and is now 70% loan to deposit, well, it didn't just happen from growth. So there had to be a lot of very unique strategies that went into that to get that balance sheet restructure in place. So yeah, I would say most of the problems, and this is a day to day thing, and I spend so much time just modeling and thinking about our growth, how to keep our liquidity in line with. I don't know how many years away, how many years removed from Silicon Valley failing that we don't have people always asking about how much cash we have on hand, or maybe that's just
Right.
a new thing going forward. But
Yep.
I'll be constantly just working through these problems, and a lot of it is just sitting and staring at the numbers and then modeling something new out and just keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. But that iteration gets you to a good place, right? I mean,
Mhm.
this team is looking for you to be the driver of laying out that set analysis set so that everybody can have a dialogue around it, right? And
Yeah,
without that, you guys are just going to sit there. So I
yeah,
totally appreciate that.
and
What?
I was gonna
Oh,
say
go ahead.
when I first got there, within the first quarter, I think. So we used to get our asset liability from a broker dealer. They run the model. You put in the inputs and they spit out the model. One of the first things I started after that first quarter, or second after 2 quarters of being there, and just knowing all of the problems I was constantly just trying to model out. I was like, I need to run this in house. I have to do this
Mhm.
myself. I can't keep asking them to rerun stuff over and over again. So I would say that was my first thing that I was very demanding of. Was like, I need a model that I can run whenever I want in however many scenarios I want, you know, on the fly, not at the end of a quarter. I need to run it daily if I want to.
Yeah.
And so that was a big piece of getting us to where we need to be.
So operating environment's a little different now, maybe a little friendlier. The curve is a little steeper. The spreads in certain product types are okay. I've seen tightening in certain pockets of the country around CRE or otherwise, but generally speaking, the operating environment's pretty good. New Fed, a lot of things playing there, but what I'm hearing is the asset roll continues to drive margin. It's going to be a margin tailwind, all else equal in this kind of environment for some time to come. So when you're doing these modeling sessions, has the opportunity set expanded because of what this naturally can do for the core margin by itself, and then what it could lead to that wouldn't be achievable otherwise? Like how are you thinking about the current operating environment alongside everything you just described?
So so the balance sheet of State Bank is I think it's very unique. Of yes, we're going to keep seeing the widening net interest margin widening, and I think a lot of that we saw a lot of that with just the natural growth of the bank going from very securities heavy to loan heavy. But something that is very integral to our bank is our funding cost, super high, very high.
Mm-hmm.
I remember very early on trying to pitch Collins maybe a leverage strategy. It was in like 2016 or 17, like years ago. And this is probably before I even knew what, cost of funds was. But in the strategy that that the strategy group put out, like the cost of funds that was being modeled like was between 25 basis points and 50 basis points or something like that. And me and Colin started talking about it, and he read through it and he was like, yeah, well, that would be nice if my cost of funds wasn't 1.75%.
Right.
So you're already kind of starting pretty high. And that was back in 2017 that, everyone else was at 25 or 50 basis points and they're over 1.5. So, the high cost of funds is very, it's something that we focus on a lot. So that the asset side, that's fine. The loan growth keeps coming in, and I don't feel like there's enough competition on the loan side. And I think it's primarily that relationship piece that I was talking about, that we're not being compressed on loan rates from, these bigger banks. We have actually found that with the bigger banks in our market, they are just really less willing to lend to our market. And we just get tons of inflow from the big banks not banking some people.
Interesting.
And so a lot of my focus does end up coming down to just keeping funding costs, getting it back down. And I think when we had a lot of net interest margin compression over the years, I bet if some banks had to see the kind of funding levels we were working with, yeah, they would have, really had to come apart, because we were just always dealing with pretty high funding costs. And so,
oh, go ahead. Please continue.
I say, and I don't know exactly what it is about the city that we're operating in, but the CD market is very competitive. There's us, we're there. There's another community bank that's also a family owned bank. And it's, you got the handful of community banks outside, but it's a very CD heavy market. And that's probably also very unique to our balance sheet makeup. The majority, probably 60% of our funding is in CDs. It's not in non-interest bearing checking accounts or non-maturity. So that kind of makes the asset liability modeling, it makes it a little bit more difficult. In some ways, it's easier in some ways because you have like these maturities that are there, but you're also dealing with these high rates on the funding side. So,
yep.
It's just an interesting thing to navigate constantly.
John, I often forget how much of a transition migration it in your loan to deposit ratio through the years, but it is a huge change. Repeat it again and talk about how that was accomplished as efficiently as you guys accomplished that, because that was an enormous move.
I'm not going to say it snuck up on everyone, but it kind of snuck up on everyone. So you're operating, and I'm going to go back to before I was there.
Yeah,
you're operating on the mindset that bonds are those are your assets. When I say 30% loan to deposit, that is crazy low. That most bankers that are probably listening to this are like, well, how did you even survive? Well, that comes to a lot of issues that then pop up down the road. You have a lot of long bonds, you have a lot of long munis. Uh, so that's part of your portfolio. Um, but you're just used to that. And I always credit it to Collins on the loan side. Like I said, people love working with him, and as he really found his footing as a lender, you just start having all this loan volume come in, and then he's not the only one. We have other lenders that are really good, and some in particular just word of mouth. We have one. She's incredibly talented, and she'll bring a loan in and into loan committee and say, like, yeah, I have XYZ person. And they're like, well, how'd you get them? They're in Tuscaloosa. He's like, well, he was referred by this person. And they're like, well, how'd that person come in? Well, they were referred. And so, she gets tons of, I think she's probably seen her loan portfolio double or triple in the last 2 or 3 years since I've been there. And it's not like she's going out and trying to find these people. She's not, and we're not approving like high risk loans or anything. It's just, I'm not saying we're super special, but I think people really enjoy the people that they work with, and then that word of mouth starts spreading. So we have very good lenders, and so as that loan growth starts happening, you get so caught up, and I think it is Collins is wearing a lot of hats. You get caught up, and you start forgetting about some things, and so capital may dip a little bit, and maybe your liquidity is not where it should be because you're used to fulfilling the balance sheet with bonds at a certain level every month because those were your only assets. And now you're not considering the fact that your loan growth is probably 10 times what it was 2 years ago. So at some point, this all comes to a head, and we're trying to think of ways to just restructure the balance sheet. And it goes back to a conversation me and you had, and it was back in 2023, and y'all pitched the sale leaseback. And we almost immediately said no. Like as you were pitching it, we were like, absolutely not. That'll never work because, like I said, with the family-owned bank, you don't really want to give up control. And I think we all just kind of sat there in silence for a second. And Collins looked at you and said,
Yep.
"Can I buy the bank?" And not like come out of pocket and buy the bank, but can the family figure out a way to buy the bank? And then you sat there for a while.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know. I think that could work. And we all just kind of had to we all had to just kind of sit on it for a while. I was like, okay, how can you get a community bank to do a sale leaseback not the traditional way? And it took, it took us a long time to be comfortable with it. And I think you probably had success in some route before we even did the transaction ourselves. But that was huge in just easing up some of the constraints that we were under from that massive. And this is just an incredibly just weaving, long-winded answer to your question about the loan growth, but that was a very big piece of restructuring the balance sheet in a way to provide breathing room.
Yeah. I remember it. I remember that conversation, and I remember exactly the reaction that you mentioned we all had. And it did take time before we got there. But to your point, we had just run a similar path with another client. It was in the state of Tennessee. And there was a successful way that they had used to arrive at the solution there. How can I make sure that the properties still stay within the family, but I create the capital infusion that I'm looking for? And it came. I thought it came together really well for you guys. But like you said, I mean that was again the story you told a moment ago about the capital being a gating issue for you, funding costs being a gating issue for you, and this just allowed you to expedite some of that time path that would have taken a long time otherwise.
And I think that's in this all kind of ties together with the sense of the community bank. So we went down the path of the traditional sale leaseback, and we got really deep into that path before they were never satisfying us because we just kept bickering with each other over contract language and just really minor details that probably they were saying no one has ever had a problem with that before. And like it was all the way down to we were having concerns about what's the deed going to look like.
Yeah.
When someone pulls us up on the land map, what's it going to say there? Because we don't want it to look like, some company out of New York owns this bank or whatever it is. Like we were just bickering over all these small details. And I think because we went down the path and we got so deep into it, eventually Collins and I were like, I think if we can eat the fees, like we've built up lawyer fees and this and that and appraisals and all this, like we can eat the fees. I think we can do this ourselves at this point. Like we finally had gotten comfortable enough that we figured out that we could do it. And that was huge. It was huge in bringing down funding costs and freeing up enough bonds to not be so strained on capital from the loan side also.
Yeah, I know it was a super elegant answer, I thought, by the time you guys got to the end of it. And kudos to you and to Collins for all the work that went into that and being able to enact that broadly with the board and the families involved, all that. Let me ask you now about I like asking this question today. AI. So at a community bank level, what is the migration or adoption of AI in what you guys are trying to do? You get the corporate level, treasury level, field level, whatever level. How is AI now starting to influence the way that you guys approach the business?
So, this is actually one of those strategic initiatives that I have not gotten really deep into looking at yet, that I want to put some of our IT guys on vetting what they think would be good. But I have lightly used some AI in my personal in my professional role personally, without bringing the entirety of the bank in there, and it's been more from brainstorming next steps by mass pulling bank data, so because I say our funding side is very unique, and then we've had this massive growth. And so I'll start describing some of those metrics and try to get feedback on what everyone else is doing without having to pull 1,000 call reports, and then start and look at, all this peer data. Cause I don't really like the peer data. I want to see something more customized to me, so that, the AI that I have used has really been having, for all of its faults, having something to brainstorm with that I can read through and be like, that's not going to work, or I don't think that's exactly how that answer should be. But it's helped a lot there. And I consulted it lightly on hedging when I was trying to figure out, okay, here's my EVE, here's my long bond. I'm putting in, just whole numbers from the balance sheet. I have this many, long dated munis. Here's their price fall of 400. And I start going through all of it, and just what's a good strategy to put on. And I've gotten strategies back from you guys, but it's really been, how can I adjust that hedging strategy going forward as I've wound down some of the long assets, and that's really where I've used it personally.
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful approach. I was at a conference a week ago, hosted a panel, and one of the gentlemen on the panel referenced exactly that. He's engaged as a treasurer. He's engaging AI to help him see, have no blind spots around what hedging strategies or investment strategies he should consider. And so he's being really liberal, I guess is the best word, in how much data he's sharing inside of a protected system. It's not, open source where it gets out to everybody, but where he can have iterative feedback about, here's what the swap curve looks like, here's what caps and floors look like, here's my balance sheet, here's the risks. What do you see that I'm not seeing? And so it's been a really good kind of reflexive process back and forth for him. I've got another friend that well, also treasurer, who spent a lot of time building out some liquidity dashboards inside of it. The pace at which Claude and other things can build out HTML dashboards around liquidity management and monitoring at the Fed or intraday or whatever it might be. He's found a ton of value out of that and efficiencies. It just feels very much tip of the iceberg. We as a firm are doing the same thing. We're doing a ton of exploration on the fixed income side around what's possible as far as just immense data analysis specific to clients and specific to the market all at once to just see what other thoughts that the system might have that we haven't thought of.
Yeah.
And then we all sit back and talk about it. It's kind of like a great prodding of a dialogue that you can have inside the team. It's fascinating.
Yeah. And the speed. So, who you were talking about, the speed at what things can come back. So I was getting ready to get a deposit study done. I had the vendor who was going to do the deposit study, and they were telling me what all information I needed to pull and send to them. I don't know why I thought of it, but I got on the AI platform I was using. I was like, Community Bank, I need a deposit study done. Tell me how to build a deposit study in Excel. And it spit back, you're going to put this information in these columns, and then it just bullet points. You're going to do this formula, this formula, this formula, this formula. And it went all the way. It went all the way through it. You didn't even have to keep up because you put. It was telling you on the front end you're going to put account open date in column B, and so a paragraph down when it references B times F or whatever the column, like it is in there, and they just dump it out. And that's incredible.
Yeah, it is. No, it absolutely is. We're having very similar experiences. You mentioned derivatives earlier. I'd love to ask your strategy, your perspective. I mean, you mentioned it shifting because obviously your balance sheet has shifted a lot. But how do you think about the derivatives portfolio and what you do at a community bank?
So when I pitched it to the board, I had to have y'all pitch it to me. I needed some experts to come in and really walk me through it, and I understood, okay, where things needed to go and how it would fix the balance sheet. So when I pitched it to the board, I go through this very lengthy I got slides up on TVs, and I'm going through all these numbers, and there was a lot of questions. And then probably where I should have gone in the first place, Collins, but I guess he's been around the board longer than me. He just looked at everyone and goes, "It's insurance." And they were like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
That was really the simple piece of it. But I think that made everything I had said click for them. And I think when I was pitching it without that piece, they were and when we put on all of our interest rate swaps, that inverted yield curve really, I guess, that was what was confusing to them, because we were just making so much money on the floating versus the fixed side that they were like, well, what about when we lose money? And that's when, Collins turned around and goes, "It's insurance. I think you're probably always supposed to lose money. This is just weird at this time that you're going to be making all this money monthly."
Yep.
And so I think that's really where the only hang up with the board came. But once we, layered in the derivatives, and then I was showing them the muni portfolio that we were hedging, and they forgot about the piece where we were going to be receiving all this money, and then when rates change, we're actually going to be paying money out. I think that was the hang up. But once they saw it in there, they're like, okay, now this makes sense. And so as we've moved on and the balance sheets changed, I've pitched strategies where I was like, maybe we should just unwind them all and kind of start over. I don't think we need them anymore, and we'll have outside directors being like, "But I like the insurance." And I'm like, okay, here we go.
Yeah. So they get it, and they don't want to let it go.
Yeah, that's great. That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't just run wild, and because rates went up, and I see that I not looking at this huge market loss on it, and I want to unwind everything. They will keep me in check that they like the insurance. But yeah, I've kept reevaluating it as we've wound down the bond portfolio, and I've started to look at different aspects of the balance sheet. Do we need to try something else? Sure, I have to hedge these long munis until I can figure out a way to get rid of all of them. That's
Mhm.
fine. And now I'm looking at different parts of the balance sheet. Well, do I need to do something with the real estate portfolio? Do I need to do something here? Or if I change this sector of the portfolio to a floating rate instead of fixed rate, will that kind of offset some of this market risk that I'm looking at? And so it's it's continued to be an evolving process. So y'all have been great about giving me information very timely when I ask for it, and even one of the folks that works at y'all's in y'all's interest rate group, they even mentioned one day when I reached out, they're like, I was thinking about reaching out to you uh, to see if we probably just remodel all of this as your balance sheet has changed. So it's
Mhm.
been evolving, and I think
Yeah.
it is necessary for different, especially our balance sheet for different aspects of it. But it's something that I don't know if I have a good hard and fast rule on what is necessary or how much is necessary, because we just keep the balance sheet just keeps changing. So we just have to keep it in the back pocket. And I think
Yeah.
I've finally gotten everyone at the bank comfortable enough with it. The only people that don't really like it are the people that have to do the monthly entries. But they, but they're good. They are really good, and they have no
Yeah.
problems with it. But
Yeah.
they're every now and then they'll just tell me, sure would be nice if I didn't have to do these.
That's great. I love it. um, so, John, I'm thinking four items to stop here to close things out.
Okay.
Number one, you're a huge Alabama fan, so I'd love your thoughts on this upcoming season. How are we doing? How are we gonna do? What's your biggest concerns? But then, probably more importantly, items 2, 3, and 4. Um, three lessons you would leave listeners with for what you see front and center for conversations in Alco and in board this coming quarter. Like, where is your focus now? So take those in whatever order you like.
Well, I'm gonna the easiest one is the Alabama football one, so I'm gonna take that one first and say I have no idea because my inside source is gone. So I'm gonna go back and talk about all those Lorino cousins that I have.
Okay.
The youngest of all of us, like I said, the ages went from 40 down to like in the 20s. Our youngest was a walk on running back at Alabama,
Oh
and
man.
he was the inside source. And now
Yeah.
he's finishing out his last year of eligibility at the Citadel. Um,
Okay.
but he had the inside track. So now we're just all lost out here. We don't know what to do.
Completely in the dark. Well, joint game. Okay.
Yeah. If he's not going to
Good.
give us the inside information, how are we going to know what's going on there? So
Yeah.
that's my short answer on that, is that my inside
That's
source
great.
is gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but if we, so we're going to go over to the Alco. So my concerns really, they're so focused on our bank that I always am harping on the funding, the capital, and the liquidity. Those three
Yeah.
things, because
In that order.
yes and no. So the capital, we really just can just parse them all out separately. So the capital piece, we evaluate a couple different things. Just like we're in the process of even thinking about another sale leaseback. Just we have other branches. We figured out how to do it. Maybe we just do another one, and that will change. That'll change both funding and liquidity in some aspects. But that'll help with the continued balance sheet restructure, and you can use it as the capital buffer and uh, all of that. And piggybacking on the capital, if we don't go that route, well, what if we put on more of a holding company loan? What if we get a holding company loan as a line of credit, so then we can just boost capital when we want to? How much of a buffer do we want? Anything like that? Because I think a couple years ago, I think I just asked you, it's like, is there any benefit for a bank my size to issue sub debt? And I think you mentioned that the holding company loan is just so friendly, you might as well just draw on that until until you have to get to the point that you have to do sub debt or something. So the capital piece is just more of just finding that buffer that we want to have. The liquidity side, we have a couple. I'm not really concerned as much as regulators were concerned in 2023 when they start harassing everyone about liquidity. As much as the regulators are concerned with bank runs, I'm not very concerned with that based on our customer base. They would pick out individual accounts and say, what about this person? Like, well, they call it like what non-core funding or whatever, and that's just anyone over a certain size account. And you're like, well, that guy's lived here for like 60 years. I don't think he's going to bank somewhere else. Like, I don't know why y'all are so worried about that. So the liquidity isn't really. I'm not really concerned about that kind of stuff, but it's really about where's the next amount of money going to come from for the loan growth. And like I said, I feel like as I'm talking about this, I'm not trying to put off the impression of like this rampant, like we're out here chasing loans and all of this stuff. It's more of just how State Bank was structured for so many years. We're just having the opportunity to finally change, and we've gone down to a new market. We're down in Fayette now as of the beginning of this year, and that's been big for the growth of the bank. So we're just having to adapt. And I'd say, especially when I go to the ALCO meeting and we talk about this growth, I like to harp on these things specifically. And kind of give them the little caveat of like, y'all have never really had to worry about this because we had so many bonds that we were able to sell that, we didn't, you haven't really seen the growth because we've been able to move from one product to the other product.
Yeah.
I was like, but at some point we can't sell any more bonds, we sold all the stuff that was, we were able to sell. So we're now really going to have to, y'all are really going to have to pay attention when we start talking about these things, because if we are lending or if we're growing at the rate that we are growing, we're going to have to start thinking about capital. We're going to have to be thinking about where the funding is going to come for that. And then, like I said about I think I said this earlier about the one board member that's an accountant and he does all these audits, and he says, at a normal company, balance sheet growth is just great. You don't have, you just grow. And he said, but y'all are over here talking about, I can't let my capital ratio dip or something. And he's like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
You have so many things that you have to, fit in between for that growth to take place. So I've just tried to reiterate to them that these are the things that we're going to really have to hone in on. As we continue to grow at our normal rate, we're not even picking up the growth, just at this normal rate. We're gonna have to start really focusing on these things because I'm out of tricks. I can't sell any more bonds to like
right
to just swap out of. I mean, we don't have any more of that. We can, and that's, I guess that's not entirely true, because we could do the next sale lease back and get a little bit of money there, but it's just really start priming. I've been trying to slowly do it, just slowly introduce, like, all right, you see if this number goes up, we have to pay attention to this one over here too. And everyone's been really good. I'll especially the way I've started approaching the ALCO meeting, especially with, a lot of the outside directors, is I will put in a presentation together and then I will email them before the board meeting, before the ALCO meeting, and just really probably overwhelm them with bullet points of like, here are all of the things that I think are great, and here are all the things that I think are concerned. And a lot of them print that stuff out and bring it, just so they have my old email with all of the things. And so, at one point, we were just going through these AL reports there, and it just gets so confusing to a lot of people that don't look at it every day. So I thought the new approach of, emailing everyone all of my thoughts, and then even in the presentation, putting little comments everywhere. I'm like, This means this means that. And they have become, you know, I think our board is very good at understanding AL reports now, but it was just an education piece, just taking the time to educate on everyone on what the different parts of the balance sheet mean.
I mean, it's such a good comment because you and I and those of us in the industry that do this every day almost take it for granted because it becomes second nature, and you just live and breathe AL reports at all times and liquidity reports. But it's entirely unfair to expect that of a lot of board members. You know, it's not that they're not sophisticated individuals; they just don't sit in it every day. So I love the comment that you made about little notes in the margin or dialogue boxes off to the side. This means this. This is how I think about this, to help somebody digest it. That's a really good thought.
Yeah. In the early days of when I first started there, and this was probably I put this on myself. I thought it was really important to go through this entire report. And we would get in that ALCO meeting and it would run like an hour and a half or 2 hours. And I'm just talking the whole time about different stuff, and everyone is just glazed over. And I'd leave work and I'm physically exhausted from just talking.
Right.
And so I was like, all right, I'm changing this. We are going to do this a different way because I don't want to talk for 2 hours and have no one get anything out of it. So it started with, all right, I'm going to put notes on every single page. And then it's like, okay, I don't think they can read. They're still, there's too much to read in a sitting. So it's just, here's the presentation, here are all the notes, here are all my bullet points. We're going to do this in a month.
Yeah.
Take it, do whatever you want with it. Don't even look at it. You can just hear me ramble if you don't want to look at it, but you should be able to get enough out of everything that's here before we have the meeting that it's gotten to the point that a lot of them do really understand what's going on, and they can come with just unique questions and not just regurgitating things that they saw in my bullet points.
Yep. That's a really good suggestion. Well, John, I've kept you for an hour. You're super gracious to spend all this time with us, and this is such a good conversation. So I can't thank you enough for doing it. And I said at the beginning, I'm going to say it again. So you're such a talented individual. I've known you for such a long time. The bank is very lucky to have you on the team. And I think hopefully the audience as a whole appreciates a lot of the commentary that you shared here, because I think it's going to be relatable to a lot of people. So thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I was, really, really happy to be asked, and, we had a good time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let me close it out. Same comment I closed with last time. Markets in the industry will constantly change, but the sophisticated individuals who help manage the process throughout will always be necessary. We try to bring those individuals onto this call to share their thoughts and comments going forward. So look forward to doing this again. To our listeners, we'll bring you another conversation on the next episode of Balance Sheet Banter. John, thanks again.